o áudio estava desligado. O áudio estava desligado e vocês não ouviram nada do que eu falei. Beleza. O áudio estava desligado. Então, deixa eu repetir tudo que eu falei aqui, depois eu aviso nos comentários. É o seguinte, isso aqui é uma sessão de estudos. Eu vou fazer 3 blocos de 1 hora cada, ok? E o que é uma sessão de estudos se você estiver assistindo isso daqui depois? Basicamente, é uma sessão onde eu vou estudar uma matéria, um material, um conteúdo e eu vou explicar para você o que eu estou fazendo ali para aprender, ok? E durante aquele período de tempo. No meu caso aqui, 3 horas. Show de bola? A ideia aqui é motivar, inspirar você a fazer o mesmo aí do seu lado. Como eu passei das 6 horas, eu não estudo por música, não uso música, nem fone de ouvido, ok? As 3 coisas que eu vou estudar hoje. Vai ser 1 hora de leitura, estou lendo o livro Productivity Challenge. Depois disso, eu tenho 1 hora de japonês. Depois eu tenho 1 hora de matemática. Beleza? Então, vamos começar. Eu tinha falado uma coisa também, que é o seguinte. Não é tão importante assim não eu falar aquilo, mas vamos aqui. Eu vou iniciar agora a sessão de leitura. Eu estou ouvindo esse livro, é um audiobook, ok? Então, se você não fala inglês, você não vai entender muita coisa. Cadê? E aí, eu estou no... Pegar meu Pomodoro e vou iniciar daqui a pouquinho. Eu estou na fase final. Opa! Uma coisa que eu gosto de utilizar, na leitura é o Scoob e o Google Reads. O Scoob aconteceu alguma coisa e eu perdi minha conta, apesar de eu ter gostado bastante. E o Google Reads eu tenho a minha conta de boas lá. Não me atrapalha em nada. Eita. Beleza. Então vamos começar agora. 1 hora de leitura. O que eu estou fazendo é fazer... Eu vou até mostrar para você. Capturar a janela. O Mind. Não vou mostrar tudo não, vou mostrar só um pedacinho aqui e vamos começar o processo, ok? Vamos lá, iniciei o Pomodoro.
Challenges go, this one is small, but the productivity costs of not getting enough sleep can be massive. If you need to form a new bedtime ritual, it helps to pick a very specific target time you want to bed, and your productivity will stay steady. When you exercise more, you'll have more energy and focus to do good work and feel less stressed out. And when you get enough sleep, You'll work far more efficiently and won't feel like a zombie all day. Sleep is one of the best and simplest ways of exchanging your time for energy. The sleeping challenge. Time required, 5 minutes. Energy and focus required, 7 out of 10. Value, 9 out of 10. Fun, 9 out of 10. What you'll get out of it. You'll save time because you'll be able to expend more energy instead of time on your work, which will let you work more efficiently. You'll also experience more mental clarity, concentration, short-term memory, and problem-solving skills, and make fewer mistakes. My challenge for you this chapter is to reflect on whether you're getting enough sleep each night, and if you're not, make a plan to rectify that. A good place to start is to ask yourself whether you feel the need to catch up on sleep over the weekend. If you do, chances are you aren't getting enough sleep during the week, and you need to invest in a bedtime ritual to head to bed by a reasonable time. As far as challenges go, this one is small, but the productivity costs of not getting enough sleep can be massive. If you need to form a new bedtime ritual, it helps to pick a very specific target time you want to be in bed, and then work backward from that time to plan your bedtime ritual. Watch out for how much unnatural blue light you expose yourself to, how much caffeine you drink up to 10 hours before heading to bed, and whether your sleeping environment is cool and comfortable. Although cutting back on sleep saves you time, any time you save below the amount your body requires is not worth the productivity cost. Remember, for every hour of sleep you miss out on, you lose at least 2 hours of productivity. Part 8. The final step. Chapter 26. The final step. Taking it easy. Over the course of my project, I discovered something curious whenever I pushed myself to get more done. It was almost impossible to push myself to become more productive without being hard on myself at the same time. Frankly, this is the downside to working on your productivity. When you do it wrong, and I have, and you're hard on yourself in the process, you end up less happy than when you started. When most of us invest in our productivity to increase our sense of well-being, odds are that goes against why you want to become more productive in the first place. Investing in your productivity is a worthwhile goal, but life is too short to not be kind to yourself in the process. But there is good news. Research shows that productivity and happiness are in sync. In fact, the happier you are, the more productive you will become. According to psychologist and happiness researcher Sean Achor, who wrote the best-selling book, The Happiness Advantage, when your brain is happier, it, quote, performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, and your energy levels rise, end quote. In fact, in his research, he's found that happier people are 31% more productive, have 37% better sales figures, have better, more secure jobs, are also better at keeping their jobs, are more resilient, and have less burnout. His research illustrates a profound idea. Investing in your happiness and being kind to yourself can have a huge impact on your productivity. So far, I've done my best to give you ways of being kind to yourself as you invest in your productivity. In fact, many of the tactics in this audiobook themselves are ways of being kind to yourself as you strive to get more done. When you set daily and weekly intentions that are realistic and not too hard to achieve, you'll be motivated to achieve them. When you accommodate the way your brain operates, it becomes infinitely easier to beat procrastination and quit wasting time. When you consider your future self when making decisions, you don't burden the future you with responsibilities that you won't be able to handle. When you clear attentional space to think, you give yourself more clarity and feel less pressure. Making small, incremental improvements, rewarding yourself, finding your resistance level, working mindfully, and cultivating your focus and energy levels are all ways of taking it easy on yourself and having fun as you invest in your productivity. Over the course of my project, I discovered a number of fun ways to take it easy on myself as I invested in my productivity, often after unnecessarily beating myself up for not accomplishing the goals I set. Oddly enough, you may feel less productive, or if you're like me, even guilty, as you become kinder to yourself. But doing so will allow you to accomplish more at the end of the day because you'll continue to stay motivated. These tactics serve as the perfect chaser to the last 25 chapters, and I can't think of a better way to end the productivity project. If you care about productivity, being kind to yourself is crucial. Here are 9 of the best ways I've found to be kind to yourself in the process. 1. Disconnect from productivity more often. As a general rule, you should be taking more breaks than you are now. That includes breaks throughout the day and breaks from work in general. I've listed this one first because it's easily the most important of the bunch. Taking too few breaks can absolutely shatter your productivity. The more breaks I took during my project, the more energy and focus I had, and the less often I became fatigued. The benefits are innumerable and incredible. Breaks help you work more mindfully and deliberately, come up with new ideas, flip into mind-wandering mode, reflect on your work, see the meaning in what you do, and ultimately make you more productive. One study found that the ideal break length for productivity is 17 minutes for every 52 minutes you work. And while I don't buy that number completely, everyone is programmed differently, I buy the idea behind it. You should take breaks a lot more frequently than you do now. One study from the University of Toronto looked at the link between breaks and productivity. It found that when we feel low on energy, it's because we have a limited amount of physiological energy in our brain. According to John Trigakos, the study's co-author, quote, all efforts to control behavior, to perform, and to focus draw on that pool of physiological energy. Once that energy source is depleted, we become less effective at everything we do, end quote. Completely separating from your work, whether throughout the day or in general, helps you replenish that pool of energy. I break for at least 15 minutes every hour, because when I don't, I notice a drop in how much energy and focus I have. For a few great break activities, try out the stress relief strategies I mentioned earlier. Exercising or playing sports, reading, meditation, listening to music, investing in a creative hobby, praying, going for a nature walk, spending time with friends and family, going for a massage. They let you recharge, de-stress, and have fun as you take a step back from becoming productive. 2. Recall 3 things you're grateful for. In his research, Sean Acor has encountered a number of ways you can actually train your brain to think happier. In addition to meditation and exercise, which Sean is a huge advocate for, my favorite 2 tactics of his are recalling 3 things you're grateful for and journaling 1 positive experience you had at the end of each day. As Sean told me, recalling 3 things you're grateful for every day is powerful because, quote, as you consciously practice scanning for positives, your brain gets better at it, and it retains the new pattern of unconsciously continually scanning the world for the good, end quote. It's not the gratitude as much as it is, quote, the ability to scan your life for positives that makes the habit so effective, end quote. Every night, even after the toughest days, I write down the 3 biggest things I'm grateful for from that day. Or if that's too hard, 3 things I'm grateful for in general. For something that takes only a minute or 2, I've found the effects of this tactic to be absolutely profound. 3. Journal about a positive experience you had. According to Sean, neurologically speaking, when you journal, or if journaling isn't your thing, talk about a positive experience you had at the end of the day, quote, your brain stamps it as meaningful, end quote. Over time, doing this helps you train your brain to think happier by letting you recall the most positive and meaningful parts of your day. But perhaps most important, as Sean put it, quote, the brain can't tell much difference between visualization and actual experience, so you just doubled the most meaningful experience of your day. Done over time, your brain connects the dots, and you realize you have a trajectory of meaning running throughout your life, end quote. To create lasting, long-term effects, Sean recommends giving these tactics a few weeks to train your brain to think happier and become habits. 4. Break tasks down. There is a reason video games seem so much more rewarding than work. Video games provide you with a rapid succession of milestones, goals, and rewards, whereas most jobs are far more ambiguous and unstructured. Creating sub-goals for larger projects, spending more time planning out projects to add structure to them, and keeping a running list of things you have to get done for each of your projects will make your work more structured, rewarding, and engaging. Research has shown this also makes you more likely to achieve a flow state, that magical feeling where you're so engrossed in your work that time seems to not exist at all. 5. Ask yourself for advice. One of my favorite ways to become more productive when I'm facing a challenge is to ask myself for advice. I value the opinions of my friends and family, but I always ask myself for advice at the same time. The next time you're facing a challenge and are looking around for someone to lean on, try leaning on yourself. What advice would you give yourself in your situation? This tactic also works wonders for firing up your prefrontal cortex when you're resisting aversive tasks. 6. Reward yourself. I've talked about rewarding yourself throughout this book, but it's so important that it's worth mentioning again. Whether that means spending 15 minutes on Facebook after each long workout, transferring $1 to a frivolous spending account for every day you don't bite your nails, or treating yourself to a fancy steak dinner when you finish a big work project, rewarding yourself works wonders not only for solidifying habits, but also for having fun as you invest in your productivity. 7. Know you can grow. According to research conducted by Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck, the author of Mindset, the main thing that separates successful people from unsuccessful people is whether or not they feel their intelligence and abilities are fixed. People who have a growth mindset believe that through hard work and persistence, they can accomplish more. They embrace obstacles as challenges to be overcome, instead of seeing them as roadblocks, and they see working hard as the only way of mastering a skill. If you think your intelligence and abilities are set in stone, you are wrong. Reminding yourself that you can always grow, and that your intelligence and abilities aren't fixed, is a great way to challenge yourself to become more productive. 8. Create an accomplishments list. For the last few years, I've maintained an accomplishments list that I've reviewed and added to every maintenance day. It's a simple list, so it doesn't take long to review, but every week, it lets me step back from my work and life, pat myself on the back, and recognize the achievements my increased productivity leads to. Before keeping the list, I had invested in my productivity without actually taking the time to reflect on what I accomplished. Reviewing the list at the end of each week propels me into the week ahead and motivates me to accomplish more, especially when I'm working on longer-term projects where the results aren't immediately apparent. 9. Look at pictures of cute baby animals. Not only can looking at cute baby animals make you go, "Aw," it can also boost your cognitive and motor performance. One study analyzed the cognitive and motor performance of participants who looked at cute baby animals, as well as other cute images, which didn't have the same effect. They found that cute baby animals had a positive effect on how participants managed their attention, and that, quote, viewing cute things improves subsequent performance in tasks that require behavioral carefulness, possibly by narrowing the breadth of attentional focus, end quote. This tactic may be a bit of a stretch, but there's no denying that it's fun. Broken. I've always been a fan of taking vacations from my work for productivity reasons, to let my mind wander, take it easy on myself, let thoughts and ideas percolate, and to give myself space to make connections and think about the ideas I'm juggling. 3 months after I started this book, I was ahead of schedule, so I decided to treat myself to a week-long vacation to clear my head. I found a deal on a flight to Dublin and jumped at it. For my week-long trip, I elected to stay in Howth, a small fishing town of about 8,000 people that sits on the outskirts of Dublin. Most days I walked out of the Airbnb I was staying at without my cell phone or laptop in tow, only carrying around a notepad while I toured the Irish seaside. I let my mind wander and captured any interesting thoughts or connections that came up on paper. It was February, and the nights were chilly, but even though it was winter in Ireland, it felt pretty damn warm during the day to me. The average high in February in Dublin is a solid 5 degrees Celsius, 41 Fahrenheit, 30 to 40 degrees warmer than Ottawa that time of year. But less than 2 days into my trip, everything went to hell. While walking home from a friend's place shortly after midnight, I fell down a steep, slick cobblestone sidewalk. After the seemingly innocuous fall, I tried to get up, but realized that I couldn't. When I transferred my weight from my right leg to my left, the pain, even after a pint or two of Guinness, was unbearable, and I crumbled back down to the ground. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket, but it was dead. I tried shouting for help, but I was out in the Howth countryside, and there weren't any people around, or if they were, they weren't awake. It was cold, and after the first hour of lying there, I started shivering so uncontrollably that I had to curl up into a ball to keep myself warm. A couple of times I tried to hop on one foot, but the pain was too great, and I fell back down again. After about 3 hours, a couple of people finally heard me yelling for help. An ambulance rushed me to the hospital just as the sun was beginning to rise. I was in a good deal of pain, and all I wanted to do was fly back home to Canada. But I couldn't, because with a shattered ankle and leg bone, I wasn't allowed to fly. It's amazing how much damage you can do when you fall the exact wrong way. After a long reconstructive surgery that left me with a pin, plate, and foot-long incision in my left leg, I lay in a hospital bed for 3 days, exhausted. To add insult to injury, I wasn't even sure the surgery would be covered by the travel insurance I purchased for the trip, and had to live with that uncertainty for a while too. It turned out it was covered. Phew. Unable to get out of the hospital bed without assistance, even after a couple days after my surgery, I remember lying helplessly while emails, phone messages, and more piled up on my smartphone. I didn't have the energy or focus to deal with any of what was coming in, and wouldn't have enough energy for weeks. When I asked the surgeon how long it would take for me to recover from the injury, his answer crushed me. Because the fracture was severe, it would take about 6 months to fully recover, and I would also need 6 months of physiotherapy. As I write this, I still have to walk around town with a cane and can't run or jump. That said, the cane is pretty badass. Making the deadline for this book in time, let alone doing a good job of it, would have been hard without my injury, never mind while being in recovery for 6 months. I was burned out, with no energy left to think or to handle anything else I had on my plate. I wished I could fast forward 6 months until the cast was off and the book was in, and I was home again, surrounded by the people I loved, instead of being stranded and alone, 5,000 kilometers away. Every day, all day, each of us talks to ourselves, and this is perfectly normal. Everyone has an internal dialogue that runs through their head throughout the day. Psychologists often call this an internal monologue or self-talk. Of all the people you talk to regularly, there isn't one person you talk to more than yourself. If you've tried out the tactics I've written about in the Productivity Project, chances are you've experienced this self-talk firsthand. Perhaps when you've become aware that you were procrastinating, as you observed your limbic system and prefrontal cortex battling, you also noticed your self-talk increase. Tim Pitchell told me recently that when you procrastinate, your, quote, self-talk goes through the roof, end quote. Maybe you noticed your brain having a heated dialogue with itself while you were meditating, or perhaps you noticed this self-talk flare up when you were considering whether or not you should tackle some of the challenges at the end of the chapters in this audiobook, especially the ones you were the most resistant to. I experienced this self-talk during my project too, and if anything, it increased as the project went on. Curiously though, most of it was negative, and I don't consider myself to be a negative person. After I made the decision to decline those jobs to start a year of productivity, my mind was full of excitement, nervousness, doubt, fear, and anxiety, and self-talk. Whenever I would put off reading an intimidating research paper, my negative self-talk went through the roof. When I stopped meditating toward the start of my project and began working faster and harder instead of deliberately and with intention, my self-talk went up, right along with the pace I was working at. After I kept my first time log, my negative self-talk exploded as I came down on myself for procrastinating for 6 hours a week. When I failed to lower my body fat to 10%, I was again needlessly hard on myself. I expected myself to be able to lower my body fat seemingly overnight, when in reality I loved butter chicken too much. When I worked 20-hour weeks, I was needlessly hard on myself again because I wasn't working as long as I felt I should. Even at the peaks of my project, such as after the New York Times published an interview with me, or after getting the deal to write this book, I was needlessly hard on myself. I remember calling myself a fraud and feeling a pretty strong case of imposter syndrome. About midway through the year-long project, I stumbled upon an incredible fact that lifted 1,000 pounds off my shoulders. Negative self-talk is absolutely, completely normal. One psychologist, Shad Helmstetter, has found that, quote, 77% of everything we think is negative, counterproductive, and works against us, end quote. Another study conducted on business students found that, quote, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the average student's spontaneously occurring thoughts are negative, end quote. Self-talk is naturally hard to measure. After all, how do you analyze what's going on in someone's head? But I think these stats confirm an idea that's profound. Having a negative dialogue in your head isn't just average. It's human. Have you experienced that phenomenon where you receive 50 emails and 49 of them are positive and one of them is negative? I'll bet you remember that one damn email more than the other 49 put together. This is simply the way we're programmed. Just as we evolved to walk 5 to 9 miles every day, we have evolved to perceive threats in our environment. That's why that email sticks out, and that's in part why your monologue can be so negative. Over the course of a few months, I collected all the negative thoughts that popped into my head, most of which seemed to come from nowhere. Here are a few of the more interesting ones. I'm way out of my element. I'll never get better at this. I'm no good. I know they'll say no. I'm a fraud. I have nothing valuable to say. I'm not good enough. I know no one else feels this way. I can't do this. I can't do anything right. Why did I say that? I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that doesn't get this. They're not going to like me. They're going to laugh. I doubt anyone's as lost as I am. These are harsh words, and if I talk to my friends the same way I talk to myself, I doubt I'd have any friends left. But as soon as I became aware that this is simply the result of how my brain was programmed, I felt as if another 1,000 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders. Suddenly, I could start to step back and observe this dialogue instead of becoming caught up in it. And I found I could challenge any thoughts that were BS, which roughly 60 to 77% of them were. As I slowly started to become more coherent after my surgery, it hit me that I would likely miss the deadline for this book. Here I was, writing a book about productivity, the most productive man you could ever hope to meet, and I would miss the deadline for my own book. In that moment, I was back in the city bus riding home after my Soylent experiment, ready once again to throw in the towel. I remember saying to myself a phrase I hadn't recalled using up to that point. I give up. But shortly after that thought came to me, I started laughing. Not maniacally or anything like that. After all, I didn't want to be transferred to the psych ward. Just a small chuckle, as if my mind had wandered off during a meditation session. Because in a way, it had. Instead of simply being in the present moment, my mind had wandered off to where it was programmed to go, to a place that was negative. It was hard, overcoming my negative self-talk, but a part of me knew that somehow, at the end of the day, I would be all right. Ever since my project, one of the very first things I've done after waking up has been to define the 3 things I wanted to accomplish over the course of the day. Old neurological pathways die. Hard, and after a day or 2 of lying in the hospital bed, I slowly regained some energy and focus. I began to flip back into productivity mode and define 3 simple things I wanted to accomplish each day. Productivity is often a process of understanding your constraints. The first day after the operation, I simply made an intention to do a couple of laps around the ward with my newfangled metal-framed walker. As I sat back down again, I felt exhilarated. I had achieved exactly what I intended to, taking into account the physical and mental limitations I faced. For the first few days, I made 1 or 2 simple intentions: to read a book, type an important email or 2, coordinate stuff with my assistant, or get in touch with friends and loved ones back home. And each day, as I reflected on how much time, attention, and energy I had, I adapted my intentions accordingly, and most days accomplished everything I set out to. By that point, I had laid enough productivity groundwork that I was able to get right back up on my feet, even though I wasn't allowed to bear any weight on the left one for at least a couple months. I knew which tasks were the most important to me at the time, which gave me a guiding light when I found it hard to focus. I had a habit of forming daily and weekly intentions to accomplish what was important. I had worked hard and was ahead of schedule so I could be kind to my future self. I had simplified my work and delegated many of my lowest return tasks to my assistant so I could focus on what was essential instead of struggling to keep my head above water. I wasn't storing my task list in my head, but rather on paper and on my devices, which helped when my mental capacity was reduced. And I built up habits, like disconnecting from the internet, taming the distractions around me, single tasking, eating well, and getting enough sleep that propelled me further and let me make good use of my limited energy. I also took the time to meditate, even if just for a few minutes every day. This didn't change any of what I was experiencing, but it completely changed how I related to what I was experiencing. It made me see the good in it, and it made me more resilient. In just a short day or 2, particularly after my nightly gratefulness ritual, I became grateful that even though the people I loved were thousands of miles away, I could still talk to them every day, that I was covered for health insurance, and that I could probably even turn the injury into an interesting story someday. You're listening to this audiobook because of the productivity groundwork I had laid. In a weird way, this audiobook is a product of the productivity research I was doing. 3.5 months after breaking my ankle, I sent the manuscript of this book to my editor. I'm still not fully recovered. That'll take another few months, but I finished the book on time. Actually, that's not true. I shipped it 6 weeks ahead of schedule. 10 days in isolation. One of the questions I get the most often about my year of productivity is which productivity experiment I've learned the most from. Early on, when I was asked, I'd usually be stumped by the question, but eventually, the answer became very clear. The experiment I learned the most from was living in total isolation for 10 days. My intention behind most of my experiments was to take an element of my work or life that I figured either contributed to or detracted from my productivity and intensely focus on it for a period of time to think about and research how it influenced my performance. Meditating for 35 hours let me step back and observe the connection between meditation and productivity. Using my smartphone for an hour let me think about technology and the internet. And eating only Soylent let me think about food even more than I regularly did. When I set out to live in total isolation for 10 days, my intention was to observe how people, and to a smaller extent, since I was living in a room without windows, sunlight, impacted my productivity. We can sometimes take people for granted or settle into less than ideal relationships. We don't often give ourselves space to step back from our relationships or take the time to think about how much meaning they add to our lives. But partway into my project, I hit a roadblock. When my girlfriend and I crunched the numbers and budgeted our finances through to the end of my project, they simply didn't work. I wouldn't have enough money to make it through my year of productivity. At the least, I would have to take on a part-time job or take out a loan to finish the year. I had no ads or sponsorships on my site because my intention with the site wasn't to make money. Even though the idea for the productivity project has only publicly existed as a website, a year of productivity was always more than just a blog to me. The year-long project was a way of exploring every single one of my curiosities and connecting as many of them as I could, whether through experiments, by diving into research, or by talking to experts, and then sharing everything I learned to help out other people. So when we realized that the numbers didn't add up, we came up with another option that is a bit embarrassing to talk about. That option was for the two of us to move back home, into her dad's house. After 6 years of living on our own, the thought of Arden and me moving in with her dad, even if only until the project was finished, felt like taking 1,000 steps backward, especially for me, after declining 2 well-paying jobs to start the project. My negative self-talk was through the roof. But after letting the idea stew, a part of us felt that it was the right decision to make. It's worth noting that Arden didn't have to move back home. She had more than enough cash in the bank, and she would be moving back to stay with me. The instant we moved in, I decided to double down on my project. Why do anything if you're not going to do it right? The sacrifices I was making would have to be worth it. Just a few short weeks later, I decided to run my experiment to spend 10 days in isolation and to reflect on the relationships in my life. When I stepped back from the relationships in my life, from my relationships with family, friends, my girlfriend, and even strangers on the street, it quickly became clear to me just how important people are to productivity. Without people around me, my motivation to get work done plummeted. The research backs this up. 2 studies found that deeper office friendships boost your job satisfaction by about 50%, and that you're 7 times as likely to be highly engaged at work when your best friend works at the same place. When I asked Sean what the most interesting thing he discovered in his research has been, he talked about how, quote, the greatest predictor of long-term happiness is social connection, end quote, and how, quote, social connection is as predictive of how long you will live as obesity, high blood pressure, or smoking, end quote, only in the opposite direction, of course. Deeper friendships and relationships provide us with the drive to accomplish more at work and make us happier to boot. But more important, outside of work, relationships give us purpose and meaning. This is the lesson that struck me the hardest during the whole of my project, and it struck me from out of the blue. Without people, productivity is meaningless. As hellish as that basement was, I quickly realized how lucky I was to be down there, exploring my passion in my own weird way. Just a few days in, I became overwhelmed with gratitude for everyone who had helped me get there. Without my girlfriend and her dad, I wouldn't have been able to continue with the project and would have had to accept a job working somewhere that had almost no meaning to me. Without the people who followed me, reading my site, the words I wrote wouldn't have helped others. Without a loving family, I would have felt far less confident in my work. And without loving friends, I wouldn't have had a support net to constantly fall into when I first started my project. It was the people around me who supported me, helped me, believed in me, and loved me that motivated me and gave me purpose. I quickly realized that the people around me weren't just the reason my project existed. They were who my project existed for. People are what gave my work meaning. And in every job I had up to that point, people are what gave those jobs meaning too. People are why we do what we do, and why we push ourselves to accomplish more. Surrounding ourselves with people has been shown to make us happier and more engaged and makes us want to become more productive too. People are the reason for productivity. Productivity and happiness. Happiness and productivity go hand in hand, but in a rather odd way. The desire to invest in your productivity implies, at least to some extent, that you're not entirely satisfied with where you're at now. For me, this is one of those conflicts that forced me more than once to step back and consider the place that becoming more productive deserved to have in my life. On the one hand, the Buddhist in me believes that happiness is nothing more than coming to terms with how things change. On the other hand, the driven part of me has always been uncomfortable with where I'm at, and for whatever reason, has wanted to accomplish more. But I came to realize that it's a good thing to never feel fully satisfied, as long as I found ways to continually cultivate my happiness along the way. The reason humans have evolved and survived for millions of years is that we, as a species, have never truly been content with where we are. We've always wanted to build bigger inventions, buildings, ideas, and movements. The fact that we have, for millions of years, constantly been motivated to advance ourselves as well as one another is a good thing, and is the reason you're listening to these words today. Without the printing press, there would be no way of spreading these ideas in 80,000 words to people like you. Without the internet, I wouldn't have been able to reach millions of people with my blog. Without language, I wouldn't have a way of expressing the dots I've connected or the strings I've pulled on over the last decade. Without your own desire to become better, you wouldn't have picked up this audiobook. While never truly being satisfied has consequences, like supersized everything at fast food restaurants, I think they're worth the cost 100 times over. This unsettledness is the reason we've evolved to be around today. Over the course of my project, I found that the best attitude to have with productivity is an odd one: to never be satisfied, but to continually find ways to cultivate happiness. Luckily, productivity, when done right, isn't only one of the keys to happiness. Happiness is one of the keys to productivity. The kinder you are to yourself as you become more productive, the more productive you will become. Afterward, 1 year later. Whenever I watch a cooking show where a celebrity chef like Gordon Ramsay visits a struggling restaurant to make over the place in its menu, I'm always a little disappointed when the show doesn't revisit the same restaurant a year or two after the episode is shot. In the shows that do, it's usually hit or miss. About half the time the restaurant thrives, and the other half of the time it either reverts to the way it operated before or goes under. Although the transformation always makes for good TV, it often doesn't last. My year-long experiment finished up on May 1st, 2014, and I'm writing these words on May 20th, 2015, more than a full year after it ended. If I were listening to an audiobook like this one, I would ask the same question that I do after a cheesy cooking show. Did the changes stick? Or did this productivity guy simply go back to the way he worked before? The answer, put simply, is that the changes stuck. Every single one of them. My favorite part of my year-long productivity project was how I actually got to experiment with everything I read about, to filter out what worked from what didn't. To put it bluntly, about half of the quick tips and productivity hacks I encountered didn't work. And as you might have guessed, those usually didn't make it into the book. Pretty much everyone wants to get more work done every day and have more time to do things that are meaningful and impactful. Quick productivity hacks are sexy, but they're the fad diets of the workplace. While you may lose a bit of water weight in the first few weeks, you won't accomplish anything real over the long haul. That takes work. While some of the tactics in this book are on the easier side, most of them take more time, attention, and energy than a simple productivity hack. But they work. And because I value my productivity so much, I've stuck with them. They will work for you too, but you have to step up. I'm not some self-help guru by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but this much is inescapable. If you want to make the jump from the romantic idea of becoming more productive to actually accomplishing more on a daily basis, you have to put in the effort. As I've done my best to make clear, productivity is made up of three things: time, attention, and energy. And I believe strongly that the greatest leaders in the knowledge economy will be the ones who combine all three better than anyone else. People like Marie Curie, Thomas Edison, Albert Einstein, Jane Goodall, and Steve Jobs all willed into existence some of the most brilliant ideas and inventions humanity has seen. And they have had the exact same 24 hours every day that we do. The difference between them and everyone else, and between the corporate vice president and the employees who work for her, isn't how much time they have every day. It's that they know how to effectively manage their time, attention, and energy, and constantly make an effort to spend each more deliberately. Just as this has been the case in the past, this will be the case in the future. The future will be carved out by the people who combine all three ingredients of productivity to work more deliberately than everyone else. Acknowledgements. I have a confession to make. I hardly ever read the acknowledgement sections of books. But as I wrote the productivity project, I quickly realized how special the acknowledgement section is. Over the last couple of years, an incredible number of people have been instrumental in making this book a reality. They deserve the gratitude of 1,000 pages. First, thank you to Roger Scholl, my editor, who believed in this book from the start and gave me the freedom to make 1,000 changes along the way. When I started researching the book writing process, I slightly freaked out about how difficult publishers and editors could be to work with. Every single person I worked with at Penguin Random House contradicted that, including Roger. Roger is one of the kindest people I've met. He put up with all of my annoying questions during the writing process and made this book infinitely better. A huge thank you also to Ayelet Grunspect, Megan Parrott, Campbell Wharton, and Owen Haney for their hand in marketing this book, and to Tina Constable for publishing this book. I couldn't imagine a better team to work on this project with. Of course, I didn't simply walk into...
Bom, acabou o Pomodoro, apitou ali. Vão ser... Aqui no Pomodoro está marcando 15 minutos, mas eu vou fazer só 5 minutos por causa do horário. Aí eu tô notando que eu tô perdendo um pouco de energia, tô ficando bocejando com a frequência. Então eu vou fazer uns polichinelos ali rapidinho só para dar uma ativada. Só para dar uma ativada. Eu tô tomando água, então eu tô hidratado. Então, polichinelo, se você estiver cansado, polichinelo e respiração profunda. Basicamente é isso que você tem que fazer. Eu vou pro meu intervalo. E aí, cadê a anotação ali? Deixa eu ver como é que eu coloco. Pausa de 10 minutos. E aí eu trago isso aqui lá pra frente. Aí. Pausa de 10 minutos. Aí. Pausa de 10 minutos. Aí depois eu volto E eu vou ler o comentário de vocês. Aí, vamos que vamos. Eu tenho 3 minutos aqui. Aí nesses 3 minutos, deixa eu ver aqui. Você é muito dedicado. Eu sou, cara. Não sei se o critério de identidade faz parte do que eu estou fazendo aqui, mas é aquela ideia do Jocko Willink. Você precisa ser disciplinado, entendeu? Tipo, você não precisa esperar nada de você no critério assim de sentir vontade de fazer algo. Então, tipo, você nunca espera que você vai sentir vontade de estudar, que você vai sentir vontade de levantar da cama. Tipo, tudo que precisa de esforço para ser realizado, não espere que você vai sentir essa vontade. Espere que você vai sentir vontade de tomar um sorvete, de tomar um café, de dormir até tarde, de assistir, maratonar uma série legal. Isso aí você pode esperar, tomar banho quente, tá entendendo? Esse tipo de coisa você vai sentir muita vontade de fazer, porque é legal, porque é gostosinho e tudo mais. Mas não espere sentir vontade de se esforçar, tá entendendo? Até quem faz academia, tá ligado que o processo de sentir vontade de ir para academia é só depois que o hábito tá, mas a dor ainda tá presente, entendeu? Mas aí a gente ressignifica o significado daquela dor, entendeu? Não é só mais a dor do desconforto, é a dor do progresso, ou seja, é um mindset fixo para o crescimento, entendeu? Mas isso é só com o tempo. Então, é isso daí. Eu acho que dá uma olhada no mindset de crescimento. Se você souber inglês, na teoria lá da Carol Dweck, e ela é muito importante esse conceito, porque igual o cara do audiobook estava falando aqui agora, mais de 70% do que você pensa no seu dia a dia é negativo. Então, quando você nota que você está pensando em algo e não está fazendo coisas, tipo assim, eu não estou planejando nada, só estou pensando aqui comigo mesmo. E aí essa coisa é negativa, eu posso simplesmente ignorar e trocar, fazer um flip, trocar para uma interpretação de crescimento, de um mindset de crescimento, entendeu? Eu não sinto vontade de estudar. Beleza, não sinto vontade de estudar. Eu entendi isso. Beleza, agora, mas aí eu vou estudar? Eu vou, por quê? Porque estudar faz parte de uma coisa que eu decidi que eu ia fazer há muito tempo e que se eu fizer isso eu vou conseguir os resultados que eu quero. E aí você ressignifica e vai falando, beleza, eu não espero que eu sinta vontade de fazer essa coisa porque eu sei que dá trabalho e esse trabalho é desgastante, beleza. Mas eu vou fazer por causa disso, disso, disso. E aí vai 1 minuto de cada vez, você vai dominando tudo. Show de bola. Então 5 minutos acabou. Vou mostrar aqui o mapa mental e o bloco de leitura. Bloco de leitura. Então é o bloco 2 de leitura. E aí vai fechar 1 hora. Bloco 2 de leitura. Feito. 30 minutos. Vamos que vamos. Vou iniciar o Pomodoro. Fechei aqui. Ó, cadê? Aqui. Fechei o Pomodoro, o intervalo. E aí eu vou começar ele novamente. Uma coisa legal é que o livro vai acabar agora. O livro vai acabar hoje. E aí eu tenho que fazer um checklist de recordação desse livro.
Random House Tower in New York and drop my book proposal down with a big clunk on Roger's desk. My agent, Lucinda Blumenfeld, did that, and this book wouldn't exist without her, either. Lucinda was by my side on this project from its inception through its completion, and I couldn't have asked for a better or more helpful partner. Over the last couple of years, Lucinda has become more than just a trusted business partner. She's become someone who deeply cares about me and my career, and even more, a good friend. Thank you, Lucinda. Also, sorry I wouldn't stop rambling on about how beautiful the universe is when you and David took me out for dinner. One of the questions my girlfriend, Arden, gets asked when her friends hear about my project is, how the heck did you put up with his weird experiments? A lot of people thought I was crazy when I started my project, but Arden didn't, and she supported me from the very first day, even though she probably shouldn't have. I can say with certainty that my project and this book would not have happened without her. This book is hers as much as it is mine. Thank you, Arden. To Victoria Klassen and Louise Jorgensen for your help in the research process for this book. Thank you. Any mistakes in these chapters are my own. I've included a few on purpose to see if you'll catch them. To everyone who helped out with AYOP, usually for free without asking for anything in return, because they wanted to help me create something neat. That includes Jim Reel, Chris O'Gorman, Todd Lukasavich, and Phil Cole for helping me flesh out the initial idea for my project. Samuel Caron, Alexandre Desjardins, and Carlos Lopez of Etc. Productions for creating the ending video for AYOP. Ryan Wang, Zach Lovett, and Chris Sauvé for helping me design, animate, and program my New Year's Resolutions Guidebook at alifeofproductivity.com/resolutions. Beverly Mitchell and Ryan Wilfong for helping out with my site. Rachel Cavan and Jenny Beharry for helping me with my body fat experiment. Aaron Murphy for taking pictures for articles. And finally, to everyone who pitched in to my project. When I started my project, I had a feature on my site where readers could pitch in if they found what I made valuable. For those who did, thank you. To everyone else who supported me on a personal level along the way, including my sister Emily, my parents Colleen and Glenn, Dan Trevisanuto, Steve and Helene Nordstrom, Mary, Des, and Harry in Dublin, John Kropp, and Andrew Payer, thank you. To you, for picking up this audiobook, taking the time to listen to what I wrote, and for staying curious right to the very end. You're awesome, and I hope you never change. And finally, to everyone in my Camp Quality tribe, in particular Matthew Perkins, every single camper, and the camp counselors who return year after year, dedicating themselves to an incredible community of people without asking for a single thing in return. You inspire me, and I could not have written this book without that inspiration. This book is for you. We hope you have enjoyed our presentation of The Productivity Project, accomplishing more by managing your time.
Beleza, estudante. Agora eu vou falar algo que pode ser útil para você. É que quando você acaba de fazer uma leitura, é bom você dar uma revisada nesse conteúdo. Eu vou te mostrar o mapa mental completo. Dê uma olhada. Esse é o mapa mental que eu criei. Eu vou tirar o zoom dele aqui. Ó, ele ficou desse tamanhozinho aqui. Tá vendo? Esse é o mapa mental, só a estrutura. E aí, se eu abro tudo, olha só. Ele fica essa belezinha aqui. Entendeu? Esse aqui é o mapa mental do livro The Productivity Challenger. E esse livro é bem interessante, porque o foco dele é em produtividade, é em fazer a pessoa ficar mais produtiva, mas não somente ficar produtivo em detrimento da vida dela, é ficar produtivo em todas as áreas da sua vida, entendeu? Inclusive a sua área social, a sua área de estudos, a sua área de trabalho e por aí vai. Eu estou falando dessa forma meio pausada porque eu estou meio cansado, mas vamos que vamos. Então tá aqui, eu vou só passar o olho nesse conteúdo. Eu estou com a folha aqui do lado e eu preciso tomar algumas decisões agora. Depois que eu acabei de ler um livro, eu preciso decidir qual informação eu vou memorizar. Então, eu acabei de ler esse livro, preciso dar uma revisada nele e eu preciso pensar em 3 coisas basicamente. Aí, eu tirei da frente. Eu preciso pensar em 3 coisas basicamente. Eu preciso pensar se eu gostei ou não do livro. E por quê? A segunda coisa que eu gosto de pensar são as frases principais desse livro. A terceira coisa, e a coisa mais importante, é o que eu vou botar em prática. De cabeça, eu já consigo pensar em algumas coisas da resposta da terceira, mas vamos pensar um pouco mais aqui. O que eu vou fazer agora é dar uma revisada nesse livro, ok? Então, olha só. Tá, o que eu estou fazendo aqui? Eu estou com uma folha aqui do meu lado, uma folha, ok? E eu estou escrevendo em bullet points, em número 1, número 2, número 3, uma espécie de história, ok? Como assim história? Uma história é utilizando a metodologia do Scrum. É tipo uma história mesmo, ó. Tem aqui a ideia de que produtividade ela tem 3 ingredientes, que é a atenção, a gestão do tempo e a gestão da energia, ok? E aí eu estou anotando a maneira que eu vou fazer para aplicar isso. Então, por exemplo, eu vou ter um horário de levantar todos os dias, para que eu tenha um ponto inicial onde eu possa começar a medir a minha produtividade. Eu tenho que acelerar porque eu tenho 20 minutos para fazer isso tudo. O importante é que você complete o projeto antes de escrever o próximo projeto. Como assim? Eu escrevi aqui que eu vou acordar às 5 horas da manhã. Então, o que eu preciso fazer para completar isso antes de escrever a próxima coisa? Eu preciso vir aqui. Eu tenho um aplicativo de hábitos no celular. Eu vou criar um hábito aqui de acordar às 5 da manhã. Ok? Crio um hábito de acordar às 5 da manhã. E aí eu vou lá no meu despertador e eu coloco o despertador para tocar às 5 da manhã. É claro que ele já está às 5 da manhã, porque eu já estou fazendo esse negócio de acordar cedo há algum tempo, mas serve para exemplificar para você a aplicação dessa estratégia. Beleza. Vou passar para o próximo bullet aqui. Eu não vou ficar falando em voz alta isso não, porque eu não sei se é importante para você ou não, mas só o segundo aqui. O segundo é sobre meditação. E eu preciso criar um hábito de meditar, porque ele tem vários benefícios para a gente, para nós humanos e nós estudantes, ok? Então eu vou criar um hábito de meditar, mas aí como eu sei que eu não vou meditar por muito tempo, eu vou começar com 5 minutos. E aí, igual eu expliquei agora há pouco, uma vez que você definiu a história, você tem que elaborar os passos para que você consiga alcançar. Então, se eu quero meditar a 5 minutos por dia, eu preciso saber quando que eu vou meditar. Eu já tenho o meu referencial, que é eu vou levantar às 5 horas da manhã, e eu sei que eu faço os 5 minutos de... eu tomo sol 15 minutos todos os dias, ok? Então, o que eu vou fazer é... deixa eu pensar. Antes de fazer o primeiro bloco de manhã, eu vou fazer um bloco de 5 minutos de meditação. Porque eu tomo sol lá para o segundo bloco de trabalho. Agora eu vou criar um despertador para me avisar. Vai cair em que horário? 7 horas eu acho. E aí 7h30 por aí eu tomo sol. Na verdade... Não. Vamos testar assim mesmo. Então é 7 horas da manhã. 7 a.m. 7 a.m. Ok. E aí eu vou criar um hábito aqui também no aplicativo de hábito. E tá ali a sequência bonitinha. Eu tenho que andar rápido porque o tempo tá passando. Vamos que vamos que vamos. Fala pessoal, tudo bom? Eu tô vendo ali de canto de olho que vocês comentaram. Deixa eu responder rapidamente aqui. Isso aqui é uma live Estude Comigo. Eu tô estudando por 3 horas seguidas leitura, japonês e matemática. Basicamente é isso. Oi Davi, tudo bom? Voltando aqui aos meus estudos. Fala, estudante, tudo bom? Voltando aqui, olha só, o meu Pomodoro acabou. Deixa eu tirar o mapa mental da minha cara aqui. Aí, o meu Pomodoro acabou. E aqui eu vou te falar uma regra que eu sigo. Uma regra que eu sigo é: depois das 6 horas eu não faço mais nenhuma tarefa doméstica. Depois das 6 horas. Por isso que sempre tem vasilha suja e de manhã eu lavo, porque é o horário de lavar vasilha. Outra regra que eu sigo é: eu vou dormir até às 11 da noite. Ou seja, não tem como eu ir dormir depois, porque eu acordo 5 da manhã. Então, o que eu vou fazer aqui é: não vou estudar essas 3 horas. Eu acabei agora de completar o bloco de 1 hora de leitura, ok? Eu acabei de ler o livro The Productivity Challenge e eu estava fazendo a pós-leitura agora. Não deu para acabar porque eu tinha 30 minutos apenas. Amanhã, na hora de leitura, eu continuo. E aí, por hoje é só. Por hoje é só. Foi uma boa produtividade, uma boa... Não cheguei de novo às 10 horas. De produtividade é diferente de 10 horas brutas, é tipo 10 horas líquidas. E não cheguei às 10 horas de produtividade, o que eu vou tentar alcançar amanhã, beleza? Mas aí, para isso acontecer, eu tenho que dormir bem, tenho que comer bem para estar preparado para amanhã. Espero que hoje tenha sido um dia super produtivo para você, igual foi para mim. Eu te desejo uma ótima noite e um ótimo dia produtivo amanhã. Eu vejo você amanhã na live solar. É o nome que eu estou dando para ela. Live solar, dia 2, ok? Por esse vídeo é isso. Continue estudando e aprendendo e não sonhe, ou melhor, não tenha pesadelos com seus estudos, sonhe com as fórmulas matemáticas. Até o próximo vídeo. Agora eu tenho que esperar um pouquinho aqui para encerrar a live por causa do lag. Tem um tempinho de lag aqui. E agora. Tchau, pessoal.